It was the autumn of 1943, and the perimeter fence at the largest German airbase in occupied Europe had just been broken open by a British bomb. A Dutch housewife was about to open her front door, find escaped concentration camp prisoners on her step, and make a choice that almost nobody in her village would ever know she made. Stay with this one, because the people who get a statue after a war are not always the ones who did the heaviest work. Sometimes the heaviest work was done quietly, in a kitchen, by a woman who burnt clothing on her stove and told nobody. Her real name was Maria Ligtvoet-Maas. Nobody in the village called her that. To her neighbors in Molenschot, a hamlet just west of the Gilze-Rijen airfield, she was me. Her husband was Thomas. They had been married for years and had no children. Thomas worked at the Noord-Brabander leather factory in the nearby village of Rijen. Me kept the house and worked the small garden and waited for him in the evenings. In 1940, the Germans took the local airfield and turned it into one of their largest air bases in occupied Europe. They called it Fliegerhorst Gilze-Rijen. They demolished houses to expand the runways. They strung perimeter fences across the farmland. The roar of bombers became a part of village life. Me kept her house. She did not stop cleaning. She did not stop cooking. She did not stop watching from her kitchen window. On 30th August 1943, the Germans added a new feature to the airfield. They brought in prisoners from Camp Vught, a Nazi concentration camp roughly an hour east. About 150 men, dressed in the striped uniforms that prisoners across Europe wore, were marched onto the airfield and put to work. They repaired bomb craters. They patched runways after raids. They moved aircraft parts. The conditions were better than at Vught itself. The food was a little more generous. The roll calls were shorter. Some of the prisoners later said that being sent to Gilze-Rijen was a small kindness compared to where they came from. It was still a labor camp. The guards still had rifles. The fence still had barbed wire across its top. Me watched it from her window every day. The Allies bombed the airfield often. The Germans had thousands of aircraft moving through it, and every raid produced new craters that the prisoners would be marched out to fill the next morning. One raid that autumn was bad enough that the perimeter fence near Me's village was torn open. The guards ran for the air raid shelters. The prisoners were left mostly to themselves. Some of them looked at the gap in the wire and made the calculation any human being would make. They crawled under it. They ran. They ran in the only direction that made sense. Toward the village, toward houses, toward doors. Me was in her kitchen when she heard the knocking. She opened the door. Two men in striped clothes were standing on her step. They were breathing hard. Their faces were the color of paper. They did not know if the woman standing in front of them was about to scream for the guards or shut the door and run for the phone. She did neither. She brought them inside. She closed the door. She told them to take off the clothes. They looked at her. They thought they had misheard her. She said it again. Take off the striped clothes. She walked into the next room and came back with civilian clothes. Men's trousers, shirts, plain dark jackets. The prisoners understood. If they walked out of the village in stripes, the first German they passed would shoot them. If they walked out in farm clothes, they were just two Dutchmen walking down a road. They changed. Me collected the striped uniforms in a bundle. She told them other men had already come, and other men were probably still on their way. She wished them luck. They left out the back. She took the bundle to the stove. That first day was not the only day. Word spread among the prisoners that there was a house at the edge of Molenschot where the woman could be trusted, where you could lose the stripes and walk out as a citizen of the country. For the next 3.5 months, Me did it again and again. Sometimes one man, sometimes a small group. She kept a supply of civilian clothes that the neighbors quietly gave her, never asking what she did with them. She never told anyone what she did with them either. The danger of being known is the same as the danger of being caught. After each handover, she stood in front of her stove and burnt the striped uniforms. December 1943. Another group of escapees had just left her kitchen and crossed her back garden. Me was standing at the stove with their clothing curled and smoking in the firebox. The smoke smelled like wool and ash and chemical dye. There was another knock at the door. She went to answer it. She thought it might be more prisoners. It was not. It was the security guards from the airfield. They were searching the village for the men who had just gone. They followed her into the house. They went into the kitchen. They saw the stove. They saw the half-burnt cloth. They saw the white striped pattern still visible through the char. They arrested her on the spot. On 15th December 1943, Maria Ligtvoet-Maas was transferred to Camp Vught, the same camp the prisoners she had helped had come from. She was held there until the Allies liberated it in late 1944. She did not die there. Many did. She was not interrogated for the names of the neighbors who had given her the civilian clothes, possibly because she would not have given them, and the Germans did not have the time before the war ended. She survived. When the gates of Vught opened, Me walked out and went home to Molenschot. Thomas was waiting. They picked up their old life. He went back to the leather factory. She went back to her kitchen. She no longer burnt any striped clothing on her stove. Thomas died in 1965. Me left Molenschot 5 years later, in 1970. She died in 1983, in a small town somewhere else in Brabant, with almost nothing about her on paper. It was only after her death that the story came out in full. The neighbors started to talk. The old prisoners, by then grandparents, came back to the village and asked about her. Hardly anyone had known. For 3.5 months in 1943, Me had collected clothes from her village without ever telling those neighbors what she was doing with them. She had been protecting them by keeping them in the dark. When the records of her arrest were finally read by people outside her family, there was no statue planned for her. There was no medal. There were a few short paragraphs in a book about Brabant during the war, and a photograph of a woman in a printed dress, standing next to her husband, neither of them looking at the camera. She had burnt every uniform. That is all for this one. If Me Ligtvoet got under your skin, hit subscribe. War Stories After Dark is going to keep finding the people the medals missed. Drop a comment if you have heard of an unsung wartime hero who deserves an episode. And share this one with someone who'd appreciate what a Dutch housewife did with a hot stove in 1943.